Shalom and welcome back to the Rabbi Avi Show, a production of Horizontal Media. I'm your host, Rabbi Avi Alpert, and I'm so glad you've joined us for this episode. Before we dive into today's conversation, which is a deeply personal one for me, I want to ask for your support. This show and the entire Horizontal Media Network is dedicated to bringing you raw, intellectual, and unfiltered explorations of Torah, philosophy, and Jewish life. We can't do this without you. If you find value in these episodes, please consider becoming a supporter. Whether it's a one-time donation or a monthly partnership, your contributions keep the mics on and give us the wherewithal to make this happen. Check the show notes for the link to support the show. Now, today's guest is someone who really needs no introduction to me, but he certainly deserves one for you. He's a fellow Tucson native, a brilliant researcher, and my partner in crime in many a holy endeavor. We're sitting down with Rabbi Yosef Lopez, the Rosh Beit Midrash at Beit Shalom and host of the podcast Chochmat HaChodesh. We're going to talk about his journey from the desert of Arizona to the yeshivot of Israel, why he traded the black hat world for the classical Maimonidean tradition, and why he believes Judaism isn't actually a religion in the way you might think. Put your seatbelts on. Here is my conversation with Rabbi Yosef Lopez.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Avi. I'm happy to be here.
So why don't you tell our listeners all about you from your perspective?
About me from my perspective. I'm involved in adult education here at Beit Shalom. And I guess it's more than adult education. I'm also involved with our Sunday school and with different programs to help reach our young members of our community. I'm involved with our college-aged, college campus-bound students at the U of A, going to Hillel and teaching there. And I suppose I see myself in my role as an educator. My job is to help people learn the Torah and to integrate it into their life and find meaning in it.
Why don't you tell us about your upbringing?
So I was born at a very young age. Youngest in my family. I was born here in Tucson. My parents still live here in Tucson. My brother lives here. He's married with his wife, and he has his children here. So, and we have family around us. I'm married to the most amazing person in the world, and we have 3 children together. We met while we were in Israel. Our first son was born there. Our 2 others were born here in Tucson. And so I guess primarily I see myself as, my first job is being their father and being married to my wife, to Sarah. I went away from Tucson for a while. I moved to Israel. That's where I met my wife, and that's where we started dating. We came back to Tucson, and we got married here. And we were very honored to have you be part of our wedding ceremony, to be there to sing the berachot and to welcome us down the aisle. And I'm always a little.
It's hard to talk about yourself.
I never know what to say. Even though I was raised here, I went to college here. I left. I've sort of fell into the rabbinate at a certain point in life. I didn't have an idea of being a rabbi when I was growing up. I wanted to be a scientist. And then I realized how much math is involved in being a scientist, and I thought that's just not gonna make. I'm not gonna be able to be successful there. And growing up here, I didn't really grow up around a Jewish community. I didn't have any Jewish friends until college, really. I had some in high school, but not really until college. I had Jewish teachers, but again, they were few and far between. So I was sort of came to Torah like on my own terms, just through wanting to know more, wanting to connect more, wanting to find meaning and truth, whatever that meant at the time. And it's been a long journey of change and growth, I suppose.
You mentioned that you grew up here in Tucson and really far away from the typical hubs of Jewish scholarship, I guess. How did that independent environment shape your thinking before you headed to the intense world of the Israeli yeshivot?
So I guess because I didn't have a community in like a conventional yeshiva sense, or like I came from some sort of um, strongly influenced Jewish background, I was very autodidactic for that reason. Because I taught myself most of the things that I wanted to know, I needed to know. I taught myself Hebrew, I taught myself Aramaic, so I had that going into yeshiva. I already had study skills that I felt were not were sort of lacking in that world. Um, and because of that, I was on my own a lot. Um, at least in the intellectual sense, I always had friends that I was close with, but I rarely had people around me who thought like I did, who believed like I did. So in that sense, it was a lonelier existence, a lonelier place.
You and I met in 2012. I watched you navigate the black hat Ashkenazi environments in Israel where you didn't quite fit in. At what point did you realize your path lay in the classical Sephardic and Maimonidean tradition rather than the modern reactionary models?
Well, that wasn't really there wasn't really a single uh point of clarity or a single turning point. Um, it was sort of an accumulation of different intellectual frictions, if you will, that I experienced. There were some specific moments that crystallized it for me, and that made me realize that um, I had the sort of same complaint that was underneath all of these different ideas and different thoughts. I just found myself suspicious of the Misorah that was being presented to me as, really how it was presented to me as hashkafa, as being a central tenet of what Torah actually was. And I just found the approach I just didn't jive with it spiritually, so to speak. I'll tell you, I remember, so one Shabbat afternoon, I was in my yeshiva. I was alone in the Beit Midrash, and I was doing something called La Mishmara or Mishmara. Mishmara is where you read certain sections of the Mikra, of the Hebrew Bible, at each Shabbat, so you finish it all in 1 year, basically. And I was there, and the Rosh Beit Midrash, he walked in, and he saw that oh my goodness, there's like a student in here steiging away on Shabbos. Everyone else is sleeping, and here he is, learning. And he was very excited. I could see it on his face. And he came over to see what it is I was learning. And I told him, I'm learning Sefer Yob. I'm reading Yob. And he sort of, um, instantly his whole demeanor changed. The smile sort of disappeared from his face, and he kind of like got up and he like walked away again. And I was like, oh, I felt like I had disappointed him, because instead of learning whatever he like a piece of Gemara, I was studying just Mikra. And there had been times where I had said like how it's very central. People need to study it. It's even, it's central to setting up uh, language and grammar and how to process and how to organize your thoughts, etc. And then I feel like it was that week, the following week of after that Shabbat, he gave a very impassioned shmooze, which, for the uninitiated, the shmooze is basically like a sermon that the the Rosh Beit Midrash gives to the yeshiva bochrim, and kind of wherever he feels that they are not having the right priorities, not having the right
Musar talk.
Exactly. It's like a musar talk. And he gave this very impassioned shmooze about how so-called Talmidei Hachamim who prioritize Nach over like the real geschmack of Gemara, that they don't know what the quote-unquote real Torah is. And I remember thinking, um, I feel like that was kind of targeted at me. And I didn't understand why the adverseness to it. What's the problem with reading Sephardic on Shabbat afternoon? And so that signaled to me something was deeply wrong. Something was definitely off in the, as they would say, the mahalech of how they were learning. Other than that, I also encountered repeatedly this truism that the Rambam, he's very important and he's very brilliant and he's a great Rishon, but we don't paskin like the Rambam. And then in certain circumstances saying, even though he was so great, you have to know that Harambam or the Rambam was corrupted by Aristotle, by Greek thought. And that for me just showed that there was an outward allegiance to these big thinkers, because if you connect yourself to a big thinker or a big rabbi, you sort of have this big name to help push whatever it is you actually think. And it's just inherently an anti-Maimonidean approach and system. And I didn't know that at the time, but I came to learn later through the writings of like people like Chacham Hosei Faor, how the anti-Maimonidean sort of inverted that whole narrative to make the Rambam to be the one who was on the not in line with traditional Judaism. Those were the intellectual issues that I had. And then there was some social issues that I witnessed that they're more than just issues. They're just abhorrences to me. Two incidences stand out. Both of them happened to be near or around Mea Sha'arim. And the first, I remember I was walking back to my yeshiva on Shabbat afternoon. And I was walking from Rehavia, which is a little bit more south in Jerusalem. I was walking back up north, so I had to go through Mea Sha'arim. It was the easiest way. And as I was approaching the outskirts of Mea Sha'arim, not even in Mea Sha'arim proper, just the outskirts of it, I saw a group of Haredi boys, children, throwing rocks at non-Jewish tourists. And I was absolutely abhorred by what I was seeing. So I objected. I said, "How will you?" I objected to the children. How can you? You can't do this. It's not okay what you're doing. And they laughed, they mocked, and I looked around. It's also the adults. The adults who were there were supportive of what their children or whoever this group of children were to them were supportive of it. And I remember I wrote about it. I ended up writing about it. I wrote to Rabbi. I was in regular correspondence with Rabbi Mark Angel at the time. And I wrote a piece. He asked me to write about it for his website, describing the incident. And it was something about how we have a very foreign idea and practice masquerading as traditional Judaism and traditional Jewish practice, when in fact it had nothing to do with anything our sages taught it, nothing to do with anything the Talmud talks about, and for certain has nothing to do with what appears in our Torah. Another incident was actually in Mea Sha'arim. This time wasn't Shabbat. It was a regular weeknight. I was looking for a book. It's usually why I had to go into Mea Sha'arim. I was looking for books. And there were a group of young men throwing anti-Zionist leaflets, but really leaflets aimed at soldiers, religious soldiers who decide, or religious men who decide to join the IDF and decide to fight for the state of Israel, protect the Jewish people. And they compared these idea of soldiers to pigs. They called them a davar aher. They're something else. They're not entirely Jewish, and that they can't even say, shelo asani avid, because they are slaves to the evil state of Israel. And that I always thought it really, really upset me. It was too far for me. So those are just some incidences that come to mind that, why I had a.
But you said in one of those that you were already in basically regular communication with Rabbi Mark Angel.
Yeah.
So how did that happen? For our listeners, Rabbi Mark Angel is really a prolific Sephardic Chacham. He's from Seattle, is he not?
He was born in Seattle, yeah. That's an interesting question. I don't remember. I think I reached out for a question once upon a time, like back in 2011, 2012. And he's actually very responsive, or at least he was at the time. He was very responsive to any email that you sent him. He would respond to it either the same day or within 24 hours. And
Wow.
I imagine he was a very busy person. He is still the Rabbi Emeritus of Sheretz Yisrael. And he is
the oldest congregation, still intact congregation in the United States of America from 1650, 1655.
Very, very old. And he was also running the Institute for Jewish Ideas and Ideals at the time. I think his son is running it now. Rabbi Chaim Angel is running it now. So the fact that, I was able to be in regular correspondence with him and he would take the time to answer my questions was, I found to be very meaningful. It was very meaningful to me. So I took his advice with, more gravitas, I felt. And I remember he actually came to Jerusalem to give a talk at Rav Yad Harav Nisim, when they would do regular speeches there. And I think this was one of the think tanks that Rabbi Nathan Lopez Cardozo was running at the time. And he gave a talk there about the Spanish and Portuguese approach to Torah, et cetera, et cetera. Even though he's not Spanish and Portuguese by birth, he's Turkish by birth, but he adopted the Spanish and Portuguese minhag when he was the rabbi at Sheretz Yisrael. But in any event, I was able to connect with him there as well. And I remember when I went to go to that the shiur that he gave, that the Meshkiach Ruhani found out where I was going, and he was like, "Oh, what's he gonna say?" That's all these as if he had nothing of value to say or to teach. So the cracks were already there. It just took the lived experience of being there, I think, to cement them for me, to see that I needed to make a total intellectual separation from for myself from them.
In the tradition of the Ge'onim, a Chacham is a specific type of wise person. How does this ideal differ from the modern, often reactionary role of a pulpit rabbi today?
Well, that's a very, very good question. So, as you said, in the Ge'onic tradition, a Chacham is considered to be a wise person. We see the different types of Chachamim. Like in Hilchot De'ot, a Chacham is defined by somebody who has balanced their own proclivities. They understand who they are. They might not be the most knowledgeable person, but they know how to approach things, how to think, how to ask questions, how to investigate properly, and how to balance themselves. And then there are other Chachamim who are more involved in the body of the Torah. They're very knowledgeable in what it is Jewish law, what's mutar, what's asur, how to analyze, how to approach a new issue. And it's at its core, it's the same sort of approach. They know how to analyze, they know how to ask the right questions. So once upon a time, being a Chacham wasn't like you go to a school to get your piece of paper that tells you that you're a Chacham. You study with you study with a teacher, and you rely on that teacher to give you tradition, to give you structure, to give you the information and the tools for you to then approach the text yourself. I know when I was studying with my teacher, Hacham Hayam Ovadian, one of the criticisms he had for many of the Semicha programs, especially in the more American model, where you study a certain curriculum for a certain amount of years, and then you take a test, and you pass the test, and then they give you ordination. Is that with that system is oftentimes the ordaining rabbi will say, all right, here's your semicha, but if any real questions come up, please don't answer them yourself. You're not really a posek. You really can't do this. You really can't do that. You call me, or you rely on another bigger rabbi and you just do what they say instead. So the whole point of Talmud Torah, it isn't even to practice it. It's not even really a way of there's no practical use to it. They can know all the ins and outs of Vav Siyah and all the ins and outs of what the Rashi and Tosafot say, and what does Rabbeinu Hananel say, and what's the Ran on this, etc., but then they won't tell you what the Halacha L'Ma'aseh is, or how to apply it, or what does it mean for, my life today. And so today, and it's not that being a pulpit rabbi that there are no good pulpit rabbis out there. There are many good pulpit rabbis out there. But the position is sort of like in the model of the Christian preacher or the Christian pastor, which is a seat of authority, and you have to agree with what the rabbi says. You have to follow what the rabbis say. And that gets us to the problems we see in the Orthodox world today with what Rabbi Joshua Uter calls Gadolatry, where it's the worship of these scholars who are inerrant and they cannot make mistakes, and they have a special connection to Torah, and for that reason we have to revere them no matter what. Whereas the reverence that people had for Chachamim, it wasn't like, oh, they're always right. It's the reverence was because of the amount of Torah they had studied, and that they were balanced people who were kind and involved in the community. And it was a sort of natural consequence of what they and who they were, rather than this demand of respect that you must have for them. And I that's when I discovered, when I was in yeshiva, one of my friends had introduced me to the writings of Chacham Hosef Haor. I had heard of him before, but I didn't really read any of his works. And the first work that I read was an essay of his called Anti-Maimonidean Demons. And I saw a lot of what he was mapping out as the downfall of Spain in these conceited scholars who were not trained properly and who spoke out against Harambam's writings. That it was really the model of a rabbi that was and is common in the rabbinic world today, of a person who is sort of loud and somewhat violent, maybe not with their actions, but definitely with their words. They engage in rabbinic violence. They engage in the sort of oppression of thought, oppression of opinion, and squashing down any sort of dissent from them because of their inerrant positions.
It's really inspirational, the way that you really comprehend what goes on in the current Jewish world. Obviously, you have an apprehension of what happened in the centuries long ago leading up to now, but it's also really comforting to know that you understand what goes on right in the here and now in the modern, quote unquote, modern Judaism, which I don't know how modern some of the Judaisms are. You really see, I like that you're able to see it. I don't know how well that does for you psychologically, having to know some of these things. I think it's painful to watch the way that our people are being mistreated, let's say.
Okay.
It's hard to be a bystander Some of us have been more than bystanders in that situation, but it's inspirational to see you get the whole picture is what I'm trying to say, which is really part of the beauty of Yosef Lopez. You often argue that Torah isn't a religion in the Western sense. If it's a system, how does that change the way we approach science, quote unquote, secular thinking, and the modern world?
Oh, very, very, very good question. The tension between Torah and science as being at odds with each other is entirely a product of Christian theological categories that's being imposed onto Jewish thought. Classical Hebrew, as we know, doesn't have a native word for religion, and in the same sense that Christianity uses it. We often use today the word dat, which we saw in Megillat Esther. It says datehem and then date. So that word dat is a loan word from Persian. And even in the Persian sense, it doesn't mean religion. It means a law. It means a system. They have their own system, is what Haman's complaint is to Ahasuerus. So Torah is a legal, political, quote-unquote, ethical system. It's not a set of dogmas and metaphysics that science is at odds with. And it's for that reason that when there is a tension in the Jewish world, trying to this is a mistake people make with the Guide for the Perplexed, for example. Oftentimes people say that the Guide for the Perplexed is Maimonides trying to reconcile Torah with Aristotelian science. So that's just not what the point of the Guide for the Perplexed is.
What is the point?
So the point of the Guide of the Perplexed, it works sort of like as a maze. It's a maze to get to your sort of center of your soul. And he wrote it for a particular student. He wrote it for when I mean a particular student, he wrote it for a actual individual student that he had. And it is sort of spelling out in a very concealed way, a roadmap, just the chapter heads, if you will, of how to achieve a sort of a deep prophetic connection with God. And it starts by the student has learned enough Torah that they know what Judaism teaches, and they've also engaged in science, but they are a little lost in how to get to the end goal of understanding God, of knowing God, what that means. So knowing God is the first mitzvah, according to the count of the Tariag mitzvot, of the 613 mitzvot, the Harambam orders in his Sefer HaMitzvot. And it's not because it's the first one that appears in the Torah. It's not, he orders that is the first one. He chose that was the first one because it's sort of the foundational point, and that's how he opens up, the Mishneh Torah in Sefer HaMaddah and Yosei HaTorah, that the foundation of all foundations and pillar of all wisdom, pillar of all science, is that there is a prime creator, there's a prime mover, and that is God. So the book of the Torah that we have, we believe it's the writing of God, it's the message of God. And we also believe that the world itself is the writing of God, the message of God, and it's the same author, so there cannot be something that is at odds in this. It's the same thing. And to compartmentalize our beliefs is to sort of chop up the world into these arbitrary boxes that are just they're simply not there. The world is a unified whole, and to understand the world through science, to investigate scientifically, to use the tools of mathematics or grammar, astronomy, music, all of that is to approach God, to get to know God better, to get to know God more. While Christianity was trying to decide whether or not people could read Aristotle's book on physics, the Ge'onim and the scholars of Old Sepharad, they were already quote unquote integrating Greek science, but not because there was any sort of allegiance to this Greek way of doing things. It was just the most accurate standard of information. And they did the same thing with Arabic medicine, with philosophies. There wasn't a learning crisis of like, should we not learn these things? Because our framework, the Jewish framework, didn't require there to be any sort of conflict. We're monotheists, and therefore we don't see any conflict.
To many, traditional means narrow. How do the sources of the Maimonidean tradition provide more latitude and creativity than the stringencies often found in our modern times and what we see as orthodoxy?
Okay. It's funny because oftentimes people will say that the Maimonidean tradition is way more narrow, because in the Mishneh Torah, for example, there isn't like a Vayesh Omrim, here's another alternative practice, or here's what we did in Poland. It's just, here's the halacha, here's the plain law. But that doesn't mean that the Maimonidean tradition is narrow. I believe that means it's disciplined. Here is a law, right? And we have to understand, how do we apply the law? And that isn't bound. That is up to the time, the situation, the place, right? So there's a difference between a sort of that narrowness of thought and a discipline with a tradition. Discipline means that you follow the text with precision and rigor, whereas narrowness, I guess, would be more along the lines of you refuse to follow the text where it actually leads you, right? Like, I am going to a friend of mine, I think is Yonatan Halevi, he would say it's being a Karaite of the Shulchan Aruch, right? It's this very hyper literal reading of this way, and it's only done that way without any sort of analysis or application. So the Maimonidean tradition will follow the text wherever it goes, and that it will be examined through the lens of science, philosophy. It'll be examined through modern medicine, through what's going on in the civilization at large, what's going on with the culture at large, and how would it actually apply. And this is an old, what do you call it?
Approach.
That was the approach when Harambam was certainly writing, and he writes in the beginning of the Shemone Perakim, which is his introduction to Pirkei Avot, that he's going to be bringing a lot of truth and wisdom from various sources. And he's not going to stop and take the time to tell you who it is that said what and this and that, because what people will end up happening, unfortunately, is they'll be distracted by who said such and such, rather than the truth of what they're saying. And it's important that we accept the truth from wherever it comes from. And it's not it's not some sort of modern, like quote, lowercase m, lowercase o, modern Orthodox approach to it's not a new thing. This is just part of who we are, going all the way back. And you see that in writings of people who people might not consider to be Maimonidean because of external stuff, like Elias ben Amozeg, who was a major Kabbalist. But you can see in his approach to analysis, to an approach to text, he is Maimonidean. In his commentary in the Em LaMikra, he is tracing a connection between the name Shaddai and connecting to the other parallels of Dios and Tao and other names of God and representations of God throughout the entire world. He says that there is a root going all the way back to an ancient lingual connection we all had. So they're not afraid. Our Chachamim weren't afraid of the insights of other civilizations and the wisdoms that they brought, and they engaged with them confidently, because they had a stable foundation in their own identity and their own way of thinking. They didn't see it as threatening or as, we're gonna, it's scary or anything like that.
You and I have both noted that many modern stringencies are just reactions to the reform movement. How do we peel back those layers of ridiculousness to find the original reasoned tradition of the Ge'onim?
I would say that most of what we consider to be orthodoxy today is just basically, we don't do such and such because that's the reform thing to do. Um, uh, this comes up almost every year, and just because it was, I don't mean to date what's happening here, but because it was just Purim, I saw this kind of conversation happens every year, where we see clearly in Hilchot Megillah or Hanukkah that women are hayav, they're obligated to read, to hear the Megillah, right? Because everyone's obligated, men, women, everybody. So if you're obligated to read it, that means you are then, it's within your, it's part of your duty then to discharge it if you can. So if you read and you're a woman, you can read the Megillah for a man. In the Orthodox world, that's like, how can that be? What about Kol Isha? What about, women? There's a rule we have that women don't count in this and that. I mean, it has nothing to do with what Jewish law has taught, but rather with the reaction to, well, the reform movement includes women, so we must not include women. So there's a beracha, there's a blessing that's said at the end of the reading of the Megillah, and in the Shulchan Aruch, I believe it says that it's based off of it's a minhag to say it, and the minhag is if there is a minyan, you would say it, and if there isn't a minyan, you wouldn't say it. And so the question that comes up every year is: are women counted in the minyan for this closing beracha? And even the Shulchan Aruch, I would say, is positioning it, yes, women count in this minyan because they're obligated in this mitzvah. And because they're obligated in this mitzvah, they would be part of the whole congregation. So you can have a congregation of men and women making up that 10. But then that's just so anathema to the quote-unquote standard Orthodox approach, because it's based off of a truism rather than a careful analysis of the text itself. And that's not even a very deep analysis. That's very surface level. A lot of the issues that we have are are more like our identity. Is this the way we want to do things? Is this the way we want to be perceived by the world?
Political.
That's a political thing. And there is more. It's absolutely true that once upon a time, maybe women weren't as involved, or that women weren't as involved in the public Jewish life. But I don't think that had anything to do with what Jewish law dictated to them. Pardon me. What Jewish life dictated to them. It was more just what was the social norm and the social reality. So that women weren't in the synagogue as often. But today, it's very clear that women are there and are part of the community, and that instead of approaching it through like this political, we need to draw the line here because it's a slippery slope, analyze the halakha itself and see how to move forward, because that's all we have as far as uh, Jewish approach right now. We don't have a Supreme Court to make new rules. We don't have a Supreme Court to overturn old laws or establish new ones. All we have is the old law that is in our hands now. That's settled law from the Talmud. It's our job to analyze it appropriately and apply it where it is needed. And that should be the actual job of our Chachamim, of our sages, engaging with that rather than making new rules and trying to impose them on whole communities as a sort of fiat, you know,
or a fatwa.
or fatwa. I was going to say fatwa. I wouldn't know if it was appropriate or not.
Switching gears here, because you and I could go on for quite some time in that direction. It's very fascinating. What a wonderful opportunity, by the way, to just have this conversation. You are involved in your podcast, Chochmat HaChodesh. You might want to call that the wisdom of the month. There's different ways to translate that. You walk us through the Hebrew calendar. Is the calendar just a set of dates to you?
Nice.
Or is it a psychological and intellectual roadmap for the wise person?
Very nice. It's not just a list of dates. It's a pedagogical system. It gives you a curriculum for development of how to develop in tune, not only with the seasons around us and the world around us, but with um, the deep psychological messages that each Jewish holiday carries with it. You know, each month carries a very distinct intellectual and spiritual orientation, and that connects us to being human beings. And the cycle is designed so that by living through it with attention year after year, um, and that's why it's called a shana, because it repeats and it's cyclical, you over time internalize an entire way of engaging with time, with community, with God, with yourself, and developing yourself as you age and as you grow. Um, and that's why, you know, a lot of the old way of establishing the calendar before we set it with, you know, with a mathematical formula, was that people had to witness the moon and testify and be engaged in constantly creating that month, creating something new each month. And that for that reason, Rosh Chodesh was a more of a time for reflection and a time for renewal. And that's the whole reason it's called Chodesh, by the way, I think, is because it's a moment to become new, in a sense, to become Hadash. And it's not a newness that leaves behind something from before, but a renewal, something that brings whatever it is we had developed the previous month and brings it up higher. So like a schedule tells you when to show up, and a roadmap tells you where it is you have to go. But the Hebrew calendar is that roadmap. If you know how to read it, you will always know where you are on the journey throughout the year.
Many people approach the months through a lens of mysticism.
Mm-hmm.
How does your podcast, Chochmat HaChodesh, stay grounded in the rationalist, peshat-based, plain meaning tradition?
Actually, I'm thinking I'm going to push back a little bit. I don't think there is the dichotomy rationalist versus mystical, I think, is also misses the point of what mysticism is and what rationalism is. I don't think Judaism is solely a rationalist ideology. There are things in there that are definitely post-rational, that are beyond our beyond our rationality. And what I think I avoid is a mystical approach that is dogmatic, that is written already, because a mystical connection to Judaism, I think, is very personal. It's very individual. And you know, one of the mistakes people make with the Zohar is that it must be that this is a mystical truth that's universal, when in fact it's just how one person related to God and to Torah and to all of that stuff. And for that reason, whatever he writes in there, many people might not understand and not be able to integrate, and trying to make it fit into the grander picture of what everyone, quote unquote, thinks Judaism is the bigger mistake. And the same thing with Pshat. I don't think Pshat is more of the, what did we say it was, the simple meaning?
Yeah, plain meaning.
Plain meaning. I think Pshat is more, in this case, like, what is the general the general sense of this word. How do most people approach what these words are? And today we live in a time where pshat isn't so pshat because we don't even have a good grasp of our own sense of what these words mean anymore. What is, um, uh, even the word pishat? Pshat comes from, means to be spread out, right? Chacham Faor talks about that in his Horizontal Society. Pshat is something that is spread out. It's not. It doesn't mean like the simple meaning. I remember oftentimes when I was, and you see this all the time in Gemara, where someone will say, "This is a," or you see it in the Shulchan Aruch. It's minhag pshat, and people translate it as, "Oh, that's the simple custom." But minhag pshat means it's like it's the widespread custom. It's what people are doing all over the place. Um, so my approach to Chochmat HaChodesh in trying to um, talk about the month and talk about the practices of the month is just to ground it in what was already taught by our sages in the Talmud, and how was it understood by the Ge'onim and by Harambam and our other sages of the Maimonidean tradition, and that can spread out. It's not solely these Sephardic Maimonideans that have all the wisdom. There are people from there are other rabbis, other traditions that connect to these words and connect to these teachings and make them clear and accessible. And I think that's what I want to. I want to be able to connect those teachings to a larger audience.
And you do such a beautiful job, and it's an incredible podcast, by the way, produced by
Yeah.
Horizontal Media, incredible company. Also, we appreciate you enlightening your listener and really drawing your listener in. And along the way, on your show, you've taken unique positions on topics like Kaddish Yatom,
Mhm.
Mourner's Kaddish. Why is it important to challenge these widely accepted customs with original source material, even if it's controversial?
That's a very good question. Some people say it's because people want to be controversial, because if you're controversial, then you get your little sound bites and things like that. But that's I don't I hate being controversial. I don't like attention. um, but
You feel like you have to? Is that it?
it says in Micha Ohev Shalom Wa'emeth, you love peace and truth, or truth and peace, excuse me. So you have to, to a certain degree, stand up to say when something is off and something is not correct. It's part of our job to, when we see something is not correct, to try our best to set the record straight, to not stay silent. And my whole reason for talking about Mourner's Kaddish, for example, in one of my episodes, it wasn't because I don't think Mourner's Kaddish is like I hate the Mourner's Kaddish, or I want to shorten the service, or whatever it is. It's something that I noticed stresses people out already. Like, people get really worked up over it, and it causes fights. I've seen it cause fights. I've seen it cause great angst and agita in minyanim and in groups of minyanim, and to actually investigate it and say, well, why is it important, or why are we doing this? And by showing that, first off, there is no classical source that tells you how or when to say Mourner's Kaddish, is a big red flag. Because if anyone who is a halakhically observant Jew knows that if we have a rule, the rule is well regulated. It tells you when it's applied, how it's applied, by who it's applied, when are you exempt, when are you obligated, how tall, how short, how etc. And if there's no rule regarding it, like Mourner's Kaddish, there's no rule in the Talmud, there's no rule in the Shulchan Aruch or Mishneh Torah. It says always it has to be at the end of the service, or at the end of a this, or at the end of a that, or you must say it this. It doesn't say. And we see that it developed, and the reason it developed, it makes a total sense. It's not that it wasn't out of nowhere. It makes sense in the context of where it came from. It was a way of sort of including orphan children in the educational you know systems of the synagogue when they didn't have any parents. And it wasn't actually a real Kaddish, so there was no problem with minors saying it for that reason. But it's sort of taken on a whole life of its own that has no halachic significance whatsoever. And one of my listeners, when they heard this episode, they told me that it took a huge burden off of their shoulders that they'd been carrying around for 30 years. Because when their parent passed away in that first year, they didn't say the Kaddish as regularly as they felt they were supposed to. And they were carrying around that guilt for 30 plus years now. And to find out like, oh, it's not required, or there's no law about it. And it's an expression of mourning rather than a...
It does seem like in modern Jewish practice, I don't care what denomination or stream, it seems like if a sociologist was looking at Jewish people, you would think that the mourner's Kaddish was like one of the most significant, important things that we have. It's more important than anything else.
And I see it like portrayed in media as like the most sacred prayer, and
Right.
And look, and I'm not trying to take away Kaddish away from anyone. I'm just trying to give mourners something more solid to stand on than anxiety and obligation that we don't even know the origins of. And that's what our sources are for. That's what Talmud Torah is for. It's to give us a path that is peaceful and pleasant rather than those ones riddled with anxiety and guilt.
Many of your admirers, and you do have quite a few, don't realize you're deeply involved with the Sephardic Brotherhood, which is not the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way. And you're involved in editing primary sources. What is one text or project you are currently working on that you believe is essential for the world to rediscover?
Oh, that's very good. So for my work with the Brotherhood, I got involved in during the pandemic, during 2020. We started studying online different things of Sephardic interest. So we were blessed to have many teachers who were available at the time, and great hachamim like Nisim and Nakave, and teachers like Albert Maimon, who were able to engage in the Ladino texts themselves. But then something we noticed is that a lot of these Ladino texts they're hard to come by. They're not very available anymore.
And for our listeners, if you don't know, Ladino is a type of Judeo-Spanish written usually in Hebrew characters.
Yes. And like we have a lot of like there are some famous works out there that are Ladino works. The Maimonides, which is, I think most people are familiar with it. It's as the Torah anthology today, that was translated by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, who writes in the introduction that his real name is actually Carmona, which was from Turkey. They changed it to Kaplan when they came to America. But in any event, that's how he was able to engage with the material so closely. But right now, I am working on projects that are not exactly associated with the Brotherhood per se. One thing I've been working on is a Brotherhood project, is something that is sort of like a booklet for mourners, because the Sephardic Brotherhood started out as a burial society, and that's what its charter is. So, but it's grown into so much more. And what I wanted to do is to provide some sort of mourning booklet for the members of the Brotherhood, something in the tradition of Haham the Reverend Hacham Henry Pierre Mendes. He wrote a book, I believe it's a very long time ago. It was 1910 when he was the minister of Sheretz Israel. And he wrote a series of books, and they all had something to do with Hayim, because his Hebrew name was Hayim. And this one was called Mikor Hayim, not to be confused with the books of Responsa called Mikor Hayim. But Mikor Hayim here was a book on how to approach Shiva, what to do during the Shiloshim, what are the prayers that we say in the house, basically Mincha and Arvit, and then like poetry and other thoughts to help direct the mourner's feelings and feel catharsis. So I want to republish something like that, because there's a real need for a sober, beautifully grounded guide for families who are in mourning that are not. And I just don't think there isn't anything currently available in a small format that is easily accessible in that. There is a book I do recommend. It's a book called The Way of Sephardic Mourning, I believe, by Rabbi Yamin Levi, who was the rabbi
Ezra Betzarot.
Ezra Besaroth, sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now he runs the Maimonides Heritage Center in New York, and he wrote a book on, I think was a very grounded human book on mourning in the Sephardic tradition and why it is we do the things we do, to see that there's a lot of wisdom in the practices of avilut and of oninut, which are different stages of mourning, and feeling the feelings that you feel, that all these sort of practices that we do, they're not these arbitrary, they're symbols that help us connect to our grief. So that's something I've been working on. It's a harder project than I think I realized. Another thing I've been working on, and this isn't a brotherhood project per se, because the brotherhood is very focused on like the Ladino tradition of prayer, the Turkish Rodizli versions of prayer. Something I've been working on that has been a long project is a Maimonidean Siddur that is Hebrew, English, easily accessible with simple instructions. There are many Maimonidean Siddurs that are available in Hebrew. I use a Maimonidean Siddur that's all in Hebrew, but not everybody has the same level of Hebrew proficiency, so having something that has an English translation and English instructions is something I want to make available.
Yep.
That's not a brotherhood project, but that's something I'm working on, because I saw something and it bothered me, and that the amount of students who are leaving Hebrew schools after being in Hebrew school from kindergarten all the way through high school, that they're leaving not knowing what any of the Hebrew prayers they are reading mean. They know how to read them. They can read them with excellent proficiency, but there's no connection with the words themselves. And prayer is not magic. It's not an incantation. It's a very formalized expression of our relationship, and the covenant, the Bereit relationship between Am Yisrael and God. And the Siddur is a reflection of that. The prayers are all a reflection of that. And for many people today, they just have a hard time connecting with these prayers. I know people who, for example, do not like Pesukei de Zimra. They don't like the Zimirot because they don't like Psalms. They find Psalms to be, I don't know, boring, as what I've heard. I feel like if there was a way to bring that to life in a certain way that connects the people with what the words of the Psalms are, and that they can connect with the Hebrew of that they can realize the beauty, the poetry, that it could bring them closer to what the project of prayer is. And that's what I want to restore through these Sidurim. I would say there are other booklets that the Sephardic Brotherhood has put out that I had a very small part in editing and being a part of. Most of the lion's share was done by Isaac Shua, who also sits on the Central Council of the Sephardic Brotherhood. And there is some very excellent work he's put out for Tu B'Shvat, for Rosh Hashanah, for Hanukkah, for different holidays. There are PDFs that are available. You can find them at the Brotherhood's website, and they can find they're easily accessible. And I'm just proud that we have something that is connecting this older Sephardic tradition, the older Sephardic traditions, with the newer generation.
Kol hakavod. For someone who feels threatened by religion or bored by narrow thinking, what is the first step they should take into this beautiful system you've embraced?
Well, how are they threatened by religion? What does that mean?
I guess that's the first question, isn't it? We don't even like the word religion when we're talking about our tradition. I don't even like the word Judaism. I like the word Torah.
Yeah.
So let's say it like this. For someone who feels threatened by Torah, or is uninformed, or has had bad experiences with Torah, what is the first step they should take to find the Torah that you possess, that you have grasped, that you have been able to discover, to kind of weave through to find those people who are actually attached to that kind of Torah, to that classical and timeless Torah?
I was blessed enough to have an excellent teacher and to have a small community of like-minded people scattered throughout the world that we can study with each other and talk to each other. This goes back to what we were saying earlier about the Torah being narrow, tradition being narrow, right? So this is the sort of thing. The Torah is a narrow system. So when people say the Torah is narrow, I want to ask, which Torah? The Torah of the Ge'onim, of the Hachamim of Old Sepharad, of Rambam. That Torah is not narrow. It's a real tradition that is broad and open for anyone who wants to come and take it. But it is rigorous. It requires attention to detail. It requires dedication to study. It requires challenging your preconceived notions. And I think that might be the hardest part of all, is challenging your already settled beliefs. Because ultimately, as you grow and as you learn, as you study, those beliefs have become are just sort of shackles that keep you from further growing. So if somebody has a notion that the Torah is, what is it, threatening to their life, or that it's closed-minded, or that it's old-fashioned, it's just a bunch of old men and old ideas, and that's a preconceived notion that can prevent them from fully engaging with the wisdom that is found in the Torah. That's not to say that none of it is all of it is modern, or that there's nothing challenging in Torah. But part of the thing that makes us grow as human beings is being challenged by ideas that make us uncomfortable, that we be challenged and that we be made uncomfortable. And the people that are saying that reading the Mikra is that's not the real Torah, that's the narrow tradition. That's the one that's helping to support this notion that the Bible, or the wisdom of the Hachamim, is old and ancient, because it's not coming from some sort of authority. A person can pick up the book and they can read it. They are the best commentary on what that is saying, because it's speaking to them in a sense. I have a friend who says that when we go to a synagogue and you pray, that's you talking to God. When you open up a book, when you open up a Sefer, when you open up the Bible, that's God speaking to you, right? And the reason we chose the books of the Bible that we chose, the prophets that we chose, the writings that we chose, is because the sages saw that there was a message in those writings, in those prophecies, that spoke to the future as well. Even though these prophecies were for a specific time and place, there was messages in them still for everyone. So by engaging with it honestly, I think, picking up the book and trying to challenge yourself to struggle with it, to wrestle with it, I think is the first step.
Rabbi Yosef Lopez, thank you so much for gracing us.
Honored. No, thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
Tizku lamitzvot.
Tizku la'asot.
And that was Rabbi Yosef Lopez. You know, every time I sit down with Yosef, I walk away with my brain feeling a little more organized and my heart a little more full. From the nuances of the Sephardic Brotherhood's work to the psychological roadmap of the Hebrew calendar, there's so much to chew on here. I love his point that the Torah isn't just a set of dates or dogmas. It's a rigorous, beautiful system designed for human growth. If you enjoyed this conversation, you absolutely need to subscribe to Yosef's podcast, Chochmat HaChodesh, where he does a monthly deep dive into the unique spiritual landscape of the Jewish year. You can find that on the Horizontal Media Network as well. Thanks for listening to the Rabbi Avi Show. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and if you can, support the show and help us keep these conversations going. I'm Rabbi Avi, and we'll see you next time.